I stood in front of the mirror, smoothing out the fabric of my red dress. It had been a long time since I had worn something like this, something that made me feel, well, alive. The color was bold, rich, reminding me of the woman I used to be before grief had settled into my bones like an unwelcome guest. 2 years had passed since my husband's sudden heart attack. 2 years of learning to sleep alone in our once shared bed. 2 years of quiet mornings without his voice humming in the kitchen as he made coffee. The loneliness had become an old friend, one I never invited, but somehow grew used to. But today was different. Today my grandson was coming over. I had always adored him, my only grandson, my pride and joy. At 18, he was becoming a man, growing into his own, and every time I saw him, I was reminded of how quickly time had slipped away. He was on vacation now, free from the burdens of school, and I needed help in the garden. It was the perfect excuse to call him, to hear his voice, to feel the warmth of family in a house that had felt so empty for too long. So, I baked his favorite cookies, letting the sweet scent of cinnamon and vanilla fill the air, a comforting embrace of nostalgia and love. I had barely set the tray on the counter when I heard the familiar sound of his car pulling into the driveway. A smile touched my lips. I opened the door before he could knock. There he stood, tall and confident, his boyish features sharpening into those of a man. His golden brown hair tousled by the wind, his eyes, so much like his mother's, lit up when he saw me. "Grandma," he said, stepping forward, wrapping me in a strong embrace. "You look beautiful." His words caught me off guard. Beautiful? I hadn't felt beautiful in a long time. I chuckled softly, brushing off the compliment as I led him inside. "Come sit," I said. "I made your favorite." He laughed, the deep, rich sound filling the quiet spaces of my home. "You always spoil me." "Of course I do," I teased. "That's my job." As he bit into the warm cookie, his eyes fluttered shut for a moment. Just like when I was a kid. I watched him fondly, feeling a warmth spread through my chest. "You'll always be my little boy, no matter how tall you get." He grinned at that, shaking his head. "I don't know about that, Grandma. I think I've outgrown little by now." I laughed, patting his hand before standing up. "Well, let's see if all that height and muscle of yours can be put to good use. The garden isn't going to fix itself." He followed me outside, rolling up his sleeves, and together, we worked side by side, trimming the overgrown bushes, pulling weeds and turning the soil. The afternoon sun cast a golden glow over the yard, and I found myself stealing glances at him, marveling at the young man he had become. "You're strong," I mused as he effortlessly lifted a heavy bag of soil. He flashed me a playful smirk. "I have to be. How else would I impress the ladies?" I laughed, shaking my head. "You don't need muscles for that. You've always had a way with words." He leaned on the shovel, tilting his head. "You think so?" I nodded. "You charmed me just now, didn't you?" His smile softened. "That's because you're special, Grandma." Something in his voice made my heart skip a beat, but I quickly dismissed it, blaming the heat of the afternoon sun. I turned away, busying myself with the roses, but I could feel his gaze on me, watching, thoughtful. As the sun began to set, we finally took a break, sitting on the porch with glasses of lemonade, the cool breeze a welcome relief against our flushed skin. He stretched, his shirt clinging slightly to his toned frame. "That was a workout." "You did well," I said. "Thank you for helping me." "Anytime." He turned to me then, his expression unreadable. "You know, Grandma, you really do look beautiful today." I swallowed, caught off guard again. "You're sweet to say that." "I mean it," he insisted. "I don't think I've ever seen you in that dress before." I glanced down at myself, suddenly self-conscious. "It's an old thing." "Well, you should wear it more often," he murmured, his eyes lingering on me in a way that felt different. I felt my breath hitch for just a second before I forced a chuckle. "You flatter me." He shrugged, his gaze unwavering. "I only speak the truth." The air between us felt thick for a moment, something unspoken lingering in the quiet space between us. I looked away, focusing on the horizon, willing my heart to slow its unexpected rhythm. "It's getting late," I finally said, breaking the silence. "You should probably head home." He nodded slowly but didn't move. "I like spending time with you." I smiled, reaching for his hand, giving it a light squeeze. And I like having you here. He returned the gesture, his fingers warm against mine. Then I'll come by more often. I nodded, feeling something stir deep within me. Something I couldn't quite name. Yes, I whispered. I'd like that. The offer came almost naturally, though my heart pounded as I spoke the words. If you don't have any plans tonight, you could stay a bit longer, I said, keeping my voice casual, though inside, I was brimming with a strange excitement. I still need help in the attic. I've been meaning to sort through some old things, but there are just too many boxes. He didn't hesitate. Not for a second. It was as if he had been waiting for this invitation all along. Of course, Grandma, he said, his lips curling into a slow smile. I'd love to help. Something in his voice sent a shiver through me. Not of fear, but of something unexpected, something I hadn't felt in years. I pushed the thought aside as I led him back inside. We took a break in the living room, before heading to the attic. The evening sun cast golden streaks through the lace curtains, bathing the room in soft light. I served him another batch of cookies, and we sat comfortably sipping on tea. The conversation flowed easily, effortlessly, as if we were old friends catching up after years apart. He asked about my life, really asked with a curiosity that felt warm and genuine. So, he said, resting an elbow on the arm of the couch, his sharp eyes studying me. Do you ever think about finding someone? Dating again? I nearly choked on my tea. What? I laughed flustered. At my age? He shrugged, that same easy smile playing on his lips. 60 isn't old, Grandma. You look amazing. He paused, watching for my reaction. And I mean it. I bet men are still lining up for you. I felt heat rise to my cheeks, a reaction I hadn't had in years. Oh, stop it, I said, waving a hand dismissively. You're just being sweet. I'm serious. He leaned forward slightly, his voice lowering just a bit. You're beautiful. Something in the way he said it made my stomach twist. Not with discomfort, but with a flurry of emotions I wasn't ready to untangle. I laughed again, shaking my head. You're quite the charmer, aren't you? He grinned. Maybe, but I'm only telling the truth. I cleared my throat, trying to steady myself. Well, if you must know, I haven't even thought about dating. After your grandfather, it's been difficult. He nodded, his face softening with understanding. I get that. Then, almost mischievously, he added. But if you ever change your mind, I think you'd break a lot of hearts. I rolled my eyes but couldn't stop the small smile that tugged at my lips. All right, that's enough of your flattery. Let's get to work. The attic had been neglected for far too long. Dust motes swirling in the dim light filtering through the small window. The wooden floor creaked beneath our feet as we stepped inside. Stacks of boxes lined the walls, old furniture covered in sheets making the space feel even more crowded. Wow, he murmured, looking around. There's a whole history up here. I smiled, running my fingers along an old wooden chest. Your grandfather and I stored a lot of memories here. I just haven't had the heart to go through them. Well, he said, rolling up his sleeves. Let's do it together. We worked side by side, opening boxes, dusting off old trinkets, and reminiscing over faded photographs. At one point, I found an old record player, and he immediately insisted on playing something. Music filled the attic, soft and nostalgic, wrapping around us like a warm embrace. It was an old love song, the kind that made the air feel thick with sentiment. As I sorted through a box of old clothes, I didn't notice him watching me until he spoke. You really are beautiful, Grandma, he said. And before I could react, he leaned in and pressed a quick, playful kiss to my cheek. I froze. It was so sudden, so unexpected, and yet so natural. I turned to look at him, my heart racing. He was grinning, clearly amused by my reaction. You should see your face, he teased. I shook my head, laughing softly. You're incorrigible. What? It was just a kiss. He smirked. Don't tell me you haven't been kissed in a while. I stared at him, unsure how to respond. There was something in his eyes, something challenging, something playful. It made me feel alive. Too alive. I stepped away, pretending to be interested in a stack of old books. All right, enough fooling around. We still have a lot of work to do. He chuckled, letting the moment pass. Yes, ma'am. But as we continued sorting through the past, I couldn't shake the warmth lingering on my cheek. nor the flutter in my chest. And somewhere deep inside, a part of me knew something had shifted, something I couldn't quite name. But I wasn't ready to stop it. Not yet. The attic was still filled with dust and old memories when my grandson suddenly straightened up, brushing off his hands, and turned to me with a twinkle in his eye. "You know what?" he said, his voice light but full of intention. "I think I want to cook dinner for us tonight." I blinked, caught completely off guard. "You?" I asked, half laughing. "Since when do you cook?" He smirked. "Since always. You just never asked." It was true. I had spent my whole life taking care of others, always the one in the kitchen, preparing meals for my family. The idea of someone cooking for me felt both foreign and wonderful. "Well," I said, brushing off my apron, "I'm not going to argue with that." His grin widened. "Then it's settled. Go relax, Grandma. Tonight I'm taking care of you." There was something about the way he said it that sent a ripple through me. Not just the words, but the meaning behind them. He wasn't just offering to cook. He was offering something deeper, something more intimate. Care. Attention. And maybe, in a way I wasn't ready to admit yet, something even more than that. I sat at the kitchen table, watching as he moved around with ease, opening cabinets, rummaging through the fridge, pulling out ingredients like he had lived here his whole life. There was an effortless confidence in the way he handled himself, like a man completely in control. He chopped vegetables with precision, sautéed onions until they were golden and fragrant, and even found a bottle of wine in the back of the pantry. "You've really thought this through," I mused, swirling the wine in my glass as I watched him. He glanced up with a wink. "What can I say? I like to impress." And he did. The rich aroma of garlic and butter filled the air, making my mouth water before the meal was even ready. When he finally set a plate in front of me, perfectly cooked steak, roasted potatoes, and a fresh salad, I could only stare. "I don't think I've ever had someone cook for me like this," I admitted, my voice softer than I intended. He sat down across from me, his gaze warm. "Then it's about time." I took the first bite, and my eyes fluttered shut. It was delicious, better than anything I could have expected. He chuckled, pleased. "That good?" I opened my eyes, shaking my head in disbelief. "It's perfect." For a moment, we just ate, the clinking of silverware the only sound between us. But there was something about the atmosphere that had shifted, something deeper settling into the space between us. A closeness, a quiet understanding. And then, as if he had been waiting for the right moment, he set his fork down, leaned back in his chair and said it. "Let's start a novel together." I laughed, setting down my wine glass. "A novel?" He nodded. "Something just for us. A story we can create together." His eyes flickered with something I couldn't quite place, something playful but also serious. I tilted my head, intrigued. "And what kind of story would that be?" He shrugged, taking another sip of his wine. "Something about two people who find each other in an unexpected way, who become closer." His words hung in the air between us, their meaning heavy, deliberate. I swallowed, my fingers tightening around my glass. "That sounds interesting." He smiled. "Then let's start." And just like that, we moved to the couch, settling in with our glasses of wine, the warmth of the evening wrapping around us. He sat close, his body angled toward mine, his presence impossible to ignore. From time to time, I caught him looking at me, not just glancing, but truly looking, as if he was memorizing me. Each time our eyes met, something unspoken passed between us, something neither of us dared put into words. But we both felt it. The question wasn't whether it was there. The question was, what would we do about it? The warmth of the wine settled in my veins, making everything feel softer, lighter, as we sat together on the couch. The air between us carried an unspoken tension, something neither of us dared to name yet. His arm rested along the back of the couch, his body angled toward mine, and from time to time, I caught him looking at me. Not just a casual glance, but something more deliberate, as if he was studying me, memorizing the lines of my face, the way I smiled, the way my fingers absent-mindedly traced the rim of my glass. Every time our eyes met, my breath caught for just a second before I looked away, but I could feel the heat of his gaze lingering. He took another sip of his wine, then tilted his head slightly, "So, Grandma, how do we begin our novel?" His voice was soft, laced with something playful, but there was an undercurrent of sincerity that sent a ripple through me. I let out a quiet laugh, shaking my head. "I don't know. You were the one with the idea." He leaned in just a fraction closer, the space between us narrowing ever so slightly. "Maybe we don't need to write it down. Maybe we just live it." The way he said it made my stomach tighten, a mix of anticipation and something I couldn't quite name. I took a slow sip of my wine, trying to ground myself, but the warmth of the alcohol only added to the strange, heady feeling settling over me. "That's a very poetic way to look at it," I murmured, setting my glass down on the coffee table. He smirked, shifting slightly so that his knee brushed against mine. "I've been told I have a way with words." His voice was lower now, quieter, as if he was testing the waters, seeing how far he could go. I should have moved, should have put more space between us, but I didn't. Instead, I let the moment stretch, let the silence between us settle like a weight, heavy but not uncomfortable. My heart was beating faster than it should have been, and I could feel the warmth of his body so close to mine. He reached forward, tucking a loose strand of my hair behind my ear, his fingers grazing my skin ever so lightly. "You really are beautiful," he murmured, his voice barely above a whisper. A shiver ran through me, though I wasn't cold. I swallowed, forcing a smile. "You're quite the charmer tonight." He grinned, his fingers lingering for just a moment before pulling away. "Only when I mean it." I turned away, exhaling softly, trying to steady myself. This was my grandson, my pride and joy, the boy I had watched grow into a man. And yet, there was something in the way he looked at me now, something that made me feel seen in a way I hadn't in years. It was unsettling, exhilarating, confusing all at once. He reached for the wine bottle, pouring another glass for both of us, his movements slow and measured. "Tell me something," he said, handing me my glass. "Have you ever thought about love again? After Grandpa?" The question caught me off guard, and I let out a soft breath. I don't know. I guess I never really considered it." He studied me, his expression unreadable. "But if you did, what would you want?" I hesitated, my fingers tightening around the stem of my glass. "I suppose I'd want to feel special again, like I mattered to someone, like I was more than just my age, more than just someone's mother or grandmother." I felt a little silly admitting it, but when I looked at him, there was no judgment in his gaze, only understanding. "Well," he said, a small smile tugging at his lips, "I think you deserve that." I shook my head, laughing softly. "You're too sweet." He leaned in just a little more, his eyes locked on mine. "Not sweet, just honest." There was something intoxicating about the way he looked at me, something that made my breath catch in my throat. I could feel the space between us closing, the air thick with something unspoken, something we weren't ready to name but couldn't ignore. My heart pounded as he reached out, his fingers brushing against the back of my hand, light but deliberate. I should have pulled away, but I didn't. I let the moment stretch, let the warmth of his touch seep into my skin, let myself feel something I hadn't let myself feel in a long time. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel lonely. I felt alive. His fingers lingered on the back of my hand, warm and steady, and I could feel my breath hitch. Time seemed to slow, stretching between us like a delicate thread neither of us dared to break. His eyes flickered to mine, searching, waiting, giving me the chance to stop this before it went any further. But I didn't move. I couldn't. The moment felt inevitable, like the final step in a dance we had unknowingly been moving toward all evening. Then without a word he leaned in. It was hesitant at first, almost uncertain, but when his lips brushed against mine, something inside me shattered and reformed all at once. It was soft, lingering, the kind of kiss that spoke of quiet longing rather than urgency. My pulse quickened as I felt the warmth of his skin so close to mine, his hand moving slightly to cradle my cheek, as if he was afraid I might pull away. But I didn't. Instead, I found myself leaning into him, my body reacting before my mind could catch up. The taste of wine lingered on his lips, mixing with the scent of him, something familiar yet entirely new. The kiss deepened, slow and deliberate, sending a shiver through me that had nothing to do with the evening chill. A part of me screamed that this was wrong, that I should stop, that this was a boundary I had never even imagined crossing. But another part, the part of me that had been lonely for too long, the part of me that longed to be seen, to be wanted, held on to the moment, savoring the way his lips moved against mine. When we finally pulled away, our breaths mingled in the space between us. He looked at me, his eyes dark and unreadable, his fingers still resting against my cheek. I started, but I didn't know what to say. My thoughts were a tangled mess of emotions I wasn't ready to unpack. He swallowed hard, his thumb tracing the edge of my jaw before he pulled away completely, leaning back against the couch. I didn't mean to, but I don't regret it, he said softly, his voice steady despite the weight of what had just happened. Neither did I, but I couldn't bring myself to say it. Instead, I simply looked at him, my heart still racing, knowing that whatever had just happened between us had changed everything. And there was no going back.